Hey, everybody. Welcome here to episode 3 of Off Season After Dark. We continue our rounds of trying to hit each conference in the FBS. Today, we move to our first G5 conference. In the Mountain West, we have Patrick here from Utah State, who runs the egg ship out there. Glad to have you, Patrick.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk about the Mountain West. Last year we can do that, really, at least in this iteration.
Great point. Yeah, this was one of the first conferences I had wanted to make a point to discuss in that our, typical base here and viewers on the show are predominantly SEC, and they get all of those schools are pretty well represented. We get good media coverage of all of them, but the further west you go, I feel like the less our fans are going to know about that conference and the individual teams. But I think most of them do want to hear about everybody else. So it's definitely something I wanted to cover. And especially now with the transfer portal, there will be some familiar guys at these schools. So, it's good for everybody to talk about this.
Yeah.
How has, with Utah State, how was that offseason going? What are expectations like going into this year?
That's a great question. That's kind of the question that everybody here has been asking as well, is how is the offseason going? And Bronco Mendenhall is not saying. They have kept things very, very under wraps. They were one of the programs that did not have a spring game. They did not have practices open in the spring. They have tried to be as quiet as possible about what the roster is going to look like and who is standing out on the roster. There are a few returners who we know and we can expect generally, pretty good play from. Bryson Barnes, obviously, at quarterback is kind of a known quantity at this point. Ike Larson in the defensive backfield has been an all-conference level guy for a couple years now. And pretty much everything else between those two on the depth chart is up for grabs. It's a brand new receiver room. It's pretty much a brand new running backs room. They have one running back returning who did anything for them last season. The offensive line is new. The defensive line is new. It's a brand new team. They have rebuilt in the transfer portal as best they can. They've added JUCO guys. They've grabbed transfers from pretty much every level that you could grab them from. They've got some P4 drop downs. They brought some guys along from New Mexico. It's the same staff, basically, save for Jason Beck, who's at Utah now. And that's how Mendenhall operates, is that he has his guys and they follow him.
Yeah, I know Nick Howell, the D coordinator, was with them at New Mexico last year.
He loves to talk about, most of the guys on his staff played for him. That's kind of his whole thing. And so it's a lot of new. It's a lot of question marks about who's going to be stepping into not just major, starring roles, but contributing roles, who's going to be even in the two deep. And beyond the 4 or 5 players who people know from last season, they've got a linebacker and John Miller back as well. Beyond the big names, it's a lot of guys who haven't played a ton, or it's guys who have played, but they've done it at other schools. They've got, a Texas Tech transfer wide receiver coming in, Brady Boyd, who played a decent amount. They've got Miles Davis at running back coming in from BYU. It's just going to be trying to fit all those pieces together. And so expectations, I think, are tempered. It's, there are hopes that the team will be, I think, more competently run this season after a 4-8 season last year, and that it will be more consistent. But there's no real, I don't think that there are expectations of like a championship run or anything like that. People would be thrilled with a bowl game berth this season. It's a year one for sure.
And I think I've said that about several schools, especially G5 schools that have a new coach coming in and see a mass roster turnover. Winning 6 games and going to a bowl game is a good year one for you.
Yeah. Well,
one of the guys I'm excited to see for them this year is Javin Jacobs at running back. He showed flashes at New Mexico. Wasn't always good. Did not have a consistent year, but did show flashes. So one of the guys, for those of the people on our network who've seen me, for the last few months in talking about Gamecocks, have talked about Face On a lot. And we have no idea if he's going to be eligible at this point yet, but was good at Utah State last year
Mhm.
before, making the
Yeah.
switch to the Gamecocks. We'll see what happens there.
I hope so. Very creative runner, very fun to watch.
Yeah.
He was a guy who was sort of a bright spot on an otherwise kind of grim season last year
Yeah.
for Utah State. But yeah, they're. I mean, it's the same thing with a lot of your ones at this level. They're looking for foundational pieces. They're looking
Yeah.
for guys who can be built around long-term guys with multiple years of eligibility. If they win this season, it's great. If they don't, it can still be successful because they're just looking to build a roster for 2026 and beyond
Yeah.
more than anything
Yeah.
else.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'd mentioned Brady Boyd, so I'm a Minnesota native, and he was with the Gophers originally
Mhm.
before. He was, for those of you that don't know out there, Boyd, who Patrick was talking about, was high school teammates with Quinn Ewers at South Lake
Mhm.
Carroll before
Mhm.
going to Minnesota, and then was at
Yeah.
Texas Tech recently. So
Yeah. It'll be, I think, him, D. McStarling, who was at Virginia for quite some time. He was
yeah,
at Western Kentucky last year. Corey Thompson Jr. is coming in from UNLV. They got Braden
Pagan,
Pegan
yeah,
from
UCLA, yeah,
UCLA. That's sort of the core of their receiving group right now. They have a couple tight ends who have been around, Josh Sturzer and Brock Lane. Not superstars, but good players, veteran guys. And that's kind of the skill core. It's those guys, Miles Davis, Javen Jacobs, maybe some young guys step up. Derek Jameson, who is the only returning running back, JUCO guy. He was not really supposed to play a ton last year, and he scored the first touch that he had. His first, I think it was actually his first collegiate carry of any variety because he didn't play at the JUCO level.
yeah.
Was a 72-yard touchdown run in
Oh
garbage time
wow,
against Washington State,
okay.
and so that was in November. And then the next 3 games to end the year, they're like, well, we might as well play this guy. He ran for 72 yards on the first time he touched the ball, so he could contribute as well. But it's a brand new skill core, save for the tight ends,
Yeah,
and really just a new team outside of Bryson Barnes, basically offensively.
yeah. Another guy that caught my eye in that roster was Craig McDonald, another former Minnesota Gopher who had been at Auburn and at Minnesota. And yeah, I think it's his fourth or fifth college going to Utah State, but he certainly is talented. And then they got a few of the D-backs from New Mexico that followed Mendenhall
Yeah,
that did play. So some of those
yeah,
guys might.
yeah.
I'm
Noah,
blanking on the name, but they also got a D-back from Nebraska who had been a decent recruit. Barnes, I think.
yeah, DeAndre Barnes.
Yeah.
Noah Avenger, Bryson Taylor, both coming in from New Mexico. They also got a guy.
Avenger was the one that caught. Yeah.
Yeah, all conference guy. He was a captain, I think, for them. He's going to be. I mean, he'll be the cornerback one for Utah State without much question. And I think Taylor will probably be number 2. They got a transfer from Elon Dylan Tucker, who was pretty good. Safety room is going to be Ike Larson, and then sort of an assortment of transfers, and maybe Omari Okiki, who has been good when he's played. He just hasn't been healthy. They got a 6'5" guy coming in from Utah Tech, Revan Hamblin. At safety, they got Bobby Arnold from New Mexico. There's a decent amount of New Mexico influence in the backfield, more than really any of the other spots on the team. I think that was the position group that they felt best about there.
Makes sense. But one of the things that was promising for me, and our regular listeners, viewers will know, kind of coaching carousel is kind of my year-round focus in what I do. But very happy with Mendenhall to Utah State. For me, he's been a winner. At Virginia, the last couple of years were up and down, but was awesome at BYU. New Mexico had been awful under Gonzalez, and in year one, he turned him around and had him going in the right path. So it was interesting with our SEC one before, and then Big Ten. I had found somewhere a larger publication who did their head coach rankings, and I'll still write articles about them. But for the Big 12 or not G5, you weren't seeing conferences that they weren't covering those. The bigger outlets weren't putting lists. So for this list, we are going to see this is a list I made, which is unlike our Big 10 one last week. But this is what I how I ranked him, and Mendenhall, I had as number one in the conference. I feel like for a G5 conference, tremendous coaches here. There's a lot of guys who've had a lot of success, whether it be at this level or the FCS level. I mean, really, there's only two guys, Chang and Sawville, who haven't really done anything as a head coach. Everybody else has had success at one place or another. So, like, what stands out to you with either Mendenhall or some of the other coaches in this conference? And feel free to critique if you have any thoughts about my list or disagree with something.
Yeah, I will. I'll defend Ken Niumatalolo, who, for my money, is one of the better coaches in college football, given
I
the
agree.
situations
Awesome. Yeah.
that he has been in. But yeah, it's a really deep league for coaches. I mean, Sean Lewis was sort of the miracle man at Kent State, and I know that the record won't reflect that, but that's an impossible job. That he made them competitive is incredible. And he didn't start great at San Diego State, but I think he's a really good coach. I think Jeff Choate is very capable as a program builder. Nevada had, it felt like 10 one-score losses last year. It was not 10, but it felt like every game that they lost, they could have won, and just one or two breaks went against
them. Last year, he was on my top 5 coaching hires of the offseason.
Yeah,
when they hired him. So
yeah, he is somebody who, on top of being a good coach and a good program builder, is capable of adapting to the realities of Nevada, which is a program that badly needed to raise money and to build more infrastructure. And
why they lost Jay Norvell to a conference opponent.
Yes, they lost Jay Norvell to a conference opponent, and then they replaced him with just the first guy who would take the job for pretty much no money in Ken Wilson, and that was doomed from the start. And Choate would not have taken that job if he had not gotten assurances that they were going to invest in their football program. And I think that it was really important that they got someone who had that mentality and who understood that more needed to be done than just, signing a bunch of JUCO guys and hoping that it would work out. So he's good. I like Eck a lot at New Mexico. I think it'll work out pretty well for him there. Danielson has obviously come out of the gates firing at Boise State. Not the hardest job in the world, but he's done well managing it.
And that some of the criticism I received about this article was having Danielson too low. And my thing is, I'm not critiquing him. It's that I need to see more out of him. If you would look back, and my example is, if you look back to the beginning of Gene Chizik at Auburn, he was a great head coach. Everybody loved him when he had Cam Newton. But I need to see Danielson when he doesn't have that demigod G5 all-star who you could just rely on every game. I need to see more.
Yeah, and I mean, Genty was their offense last year. That was the offense, was give the ball to Genty, which was a good approach. It worked out pretty well for them. But you do definitely get with him. There's a class of G5 head coaches who were internal promotions who have, in a lot of instances, struggled to make the program their own. Silverfield at Memphis is one who comes to mind. Desermo at Louisiana is starting to do this. There's a lot.
One guy who we worried about that with is now on a different job. Tim Albin took over for Frank Solich in Ohio, did well. Now took a job at Charlotte. I'm writing about him in Silverfield as we speak and covering the AAC.
Yeah, and it can work out, but it can also, App State just fired a coach for not making the program his own, and Sean Clark, and that's a program guy. That's a guy who is well known in Boone and well liked in Boone. It just didn't work out, and it's always a risk when you make those internal promotions. But Danielson has done really well to keep the sports car on the road, essentially, which is kind of all you can do when you have Ashton Genty, and when you don't really. There's no real need to change the identity of the program because of the talent that he had. Now he will have to prove that there's a next evolution beyond that. But I mean, it's hard to question what he's been able to do so far. And then that top 4, I mean, it's just guys who win games. It's not the flashiest group in the Mountain West, but you have a lot of coaches who just know how to build a program, know how to get to bowl games, know how to contend for conference championships. And the result is you have a lot of teams that are pretty good, a lot of teams that are somewhere between pretty good and very good, and then you don't really usually have that top end unless you get somebody like Genty at Boise State who can take that team up over the top. But it's a well-coached league, and it has been for a
It
couple
is.
years now.
Yeah. Two of the guys I'm maybe the most curious to see this year are 7 and 8, the new guys. We have Matt Entz coming over from Fresno, or at Fresno, and Jason Eck at New Mexico. Two guys who were fantastic FCS head coaches. Entz won 2 national titles. Eck led a resurgence at Idaho. These guys were absolute winners at a lower level. Entz spent last season as a linebackers coach at USC. How they can do with their programs is fascinating to me. With Eck, you have a program not traditionally, winning down with the Lobos, but Mendenhall did well there last year. At Fresno, it's kind of the opposite. We've seen Pat Hill and Jeff Tedford both win a lot of games there in the last 2 decades. Not great last year, have been a little down, but with Entz there and EJ Warner coming in at QB, very curious to see how both of those guys adapt in year 1.
Yeah, and you have in addition to 2 very different programs, you have 2 very different styles of head coach.
Yeah.
Because Entz was another one of those internal promotions at North Dakota State. He was a system guy. He was,
Yes.
one in a long line of system guys at North Dakota State.
He was Chris Kleiman's D coordinator.
Yeah, and is that comes with the reputation of being more of a program builder, more of a we're going to build out the talent, we're going to build out the culture, and then we're going to we're going to roll the ball out, and our talent and our culture is going to beat yours. And then with Eck, he couldn't really do that at Idaho. It's not that I think he is capable of that in the right situation, but you have to find other ways to win games at Idaho. And so he innovated. He changed the way that they did things offensively. They scored a lot of points. They went really fast. He is much more of a scheme coach, at least at this stage in his career. And I think that with the history of those 2 programs, those coaches both make sense for what you need to be successful there. New Mexico has to do something different. It has to be it has to be unique in some aspect, whether it's schematic or in the kind of guys that they're recruiting, or in just some aspect of the program has to stand out to make them notable and to make them capable of winning games. Whereas Fresno State, you're in a hotbed of talent. There's plenty of players that you can get access to in that Valley area, JUCO and otherwise. That's probably the richest JUCO talent vein in the country, save for maybe Kansas, Kansas area, Louisiana area. And it doesn't require so much work on the back end innovating. It's more maintaining and building relationships with local coaches, bringing guys back to the Valley in the transfer portal, guys who may went to power conference schools elsewhere and then want to come back home. You have much greater access to talent there, and I think that Entz fits that just like Eck fits the need for innovation at New Mexico. They're both hires that make sense for the program that made them.
Agree. And it's interesting, both of these 2 guys we're talking about were coordinators at the 2 preeminent FCS programs in the country not so long ago. Eck coming out of South Dakota State, Entz had been at North Dakota State, and we've seen a very rapid ascension from both of them to where they're at now. And both warranted. Eck made the playoffs every year when he was at Idaho. Entz, of course, did at North Dakota State. And then I think why he left for USC, still a mystery. I think, they were winning at NSU. They obviously Polasek's first year, they won the national title there. I don't know if he didn't want to be the boss or thought it was a path to a better FBS head coaching job. Clearly it was, I guess, if that's what he wanted. But whatever his reasons are, it has worked out for him. And because a lot of people, I think initially, and being from that neck of the woods, thought, well, maybe he doesn't want to be a head coach. Maybe he just wants to go back to being an assistant. clearly we can't use that argument anymore because he was only an assistant for 1 year before becoming a head coach again.
Yeah, I think he saw that as a more likely path to becoming an
Yes.
FBS head coach. I think that maybe that Fresno State job was one that he had his eyes
Could have
on.
been.
Because I
Absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
Jeff Tedford was not one of the youngest coaches in college football
No.
at that point and has had health issues before. And I think Entz did see the opportunity to get his name in front of more potential G5 jobs if he was at a USC as a position coach, and he could tout his resume at North Dakota State. I don't love that he did that. I don't want FCS coaches really to do that. I don't love the inspiration that he might be giving to other successful FCS head coaches to go take position coaching jobs, but it worked.
I don't mind seeing FCS guys like him do it. I don't want to see guys like Sean Lewis leave G5 head coaching jobs to be coordinators to do it.
Yeah.
Which
for
has
Mo
worked out for
Lindquist.
him again. But
yeah. It's I want to keep head coaching talent as head coaches. Essentially,
Absolutely.
I don't really want to see Alabama with 10 former G5 head coaches, even if it's like it probably benefited Buffalo that Mo Lindquist left because I think Pete Lembo's a better head coach.
Lembo's at South Carolina when I was great head coach. Won at Ball State before in the conference.
Yeah. As much as we can avoid that would be preferable.
No, well, another team who, and by extension, coach, how Jay Sobel does in year 2 at Wyoming is interesting to me because they start, Craig Ball was awesome there at NDSU guy, kind of the founder of the feast there that really started the dynasty. But they were not good in Sobel's year 1 last year. They were 3-9. We'll see how they adapt and can move past that in what's a tough conference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They were bad. They were really bad. There's not a ton of ways around it. The defense declined significantly. I think part of it was because of the offense being as bad as it was. They picked the wrong quarterback with Evan Svoboda.
Yeah.
He was just not. He's a tight end now. He's still on the roster, but he's a tight end, and that's a pretty good reflection of what happened with him at quarterback. They eventually made their way to Anderson, and Anderson was better and will be the quarterback there this season.
Yeah.
But the damage was already done at that point. I remember covering Utah State playing at Wyoming, and Utah State wins on a game-winning field goal, and that was right around the point in the season where Wyoming is going back and forth between Svoboda and Anderson, even within games, and it was night and day. It's like the Anderson possessions, they're moving the ball, even if they're not scoring, they're picking up first downs, they're getting better field position for their defense, they're being generally more successful. And then Svoboda comes in and it's 3 and out. It's like, what are you guys doing? How many drives do you need to see this at this point? We're 8 weeks into the season. This guy's not your quarterback. I don't understand why you keep doing this. And that was really, I think, the defining problem for them last season was picking the wrong quarterback. But they also, they returned a decent amount of that 2023 team. I thought they were going to be pretty good, and none of it worked. Everything fell apart. I don't know if Bowl was just that good, and we didn't fully appreciate how good Craig Bowl is at coaching, but they did not look like a Wyoming football team really at any point during the season, even as they kind of not even rounded into form, but found some wins near the end of the season. They were hard to watch. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't play defense. They really couldn't do much of anything.
And even the one guy I thought they would be able to rely on and just hand him the ball was Harrison Whaley. They couldn't even run the ball well when they did that. He's at Virginia now, got an extra year, but he had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, I believe, and they just couldn't even do that. I remember a Wyoming coach, he had been at Marshall the year before, but was a Wyoming player back when, and I remember when he was on the path to going there, I talked to him, and that they loved Svoboda. They thought he was really going to be a guy, and there were people saying, he could be the next Josh Allen. Clearly, that was very far from the truth, and has shown us to not be the case at all.
And that's a current that they kind of have to fight against, I think, is the instinct to see a big quarterback and to think, well, that guy could be Josh Allen. because they do, when you have a quarterback who is as important to your program as Josh Allen was for Wyoming, you do tend to look for other versions of that guy. And the problem is that there's really just the one Josh Allen. It's not, they don't really grow on trees just because you have another 6'5", 240-pound quarterback. Especially if this one can't throw. That's kind of an issue for a quarterback if he can't throw the ball down the field. And they came to their senses eventually, and they did find, Caden Anderson, who I think is going to be good for them. He was pretty impressive as a young guy last season, but there was a lot of pushback against moving away from Svoboda early on in the season. And I think that Savell kind of fell into that trap. And then as the year goes on and Wyoming fans start to come to terms with okay, this kid can't throw. We need to maybe think about moving to Caden Anderson. At that point, the coaching staff was pot committed to Svoboda and still wouldn't move off of him, and really didn't do so fully until November. And at that point, the season's wasted. You're 1-7.
And they got 3 wins. 2 of them were 2 of their last 4 games wins for Svoboda, when Anderson was playing. Yeah. But in fact, that transitions us to our next topic well in the QB list. So this is Chris Murray, Nevada Sportsnet ranked the conference QBs, and has Anderson at 8, solidly in the middle there. A couple observations I had here was I'm a big Warner fan. He's done well at a few different spots.
Yeah.
I thought Fowler Nicolosi might be a little higher. He's had 2 decent seasons. And with Madsen, he didn't turn the ball over, but they didn't ask him to do a lot last year. I don't know that he has earned being the number 1 on this list, other than just winning the conference last year.
Yeah, this it's an interesting list because Madsen did have several times last season going into big Boise State games. The big question that I had was when they need a big third down conversion, when it's 3rd and long, it's a passing down, can they trust him to step up and make a play? And generally he did. And I think that he certainly took steps forward last season, even if the consistency game to game wise still was not there. It really didn't need to be with Ashton Genty. I think Madsen's a good quarterback. I don't know if he's going to be great. I would probably have Warner number 1 at this point. I think Fowler Nicolosi probably deserves a little bit more credit. Not a superstar, but generally pretty good at doing what Colorado State wants him to do. He's cut down on the interceptions pretty well.
One of my thoughts too is I do not think Alex Orji will be UNLV's guy. I think Anthony Calambria, the Virginia transfer, will be. Now, Orji will come in for packages. He's very good at running. He's very athletic. He'll play some. I think Calambria is going to be the starter at UNLV.
I would agree. Yeah, I don't know if you can build an entire offense around Alex Orji. I think that Calandria is a far safer pick and a far more suitable pick for what Dan Mullen wants to do offensively. Orji will have a role, but I think it'll probably be pretty similar to the role that he filled at Michigan, which is go in and get us 5 yards on the ground. And maybe run some trick plays and then come back out before you do something that will cost us a possession and maybe the entire game. But there's also, it's interesting, the faith here with these rankings in unproven young guys, in Micah Alejado at Hawaii and Chubba Purdy at Nevada. I know Nevada's high on Purdy. They didn't bring in any transfers. They're going to go with him as the guy. Hawaii's in pretty similar spot, replacing Braden Shager. Alejado looked good last year when he played, but Walker Reget was pretty good for San Jose State.
He was.
Fowler Nicolosi's a multi-year starter. Even Bryson Barnes, I think, has done more at the collegiate level than either of those guys. They could be good, but it feels like that's a lot of faith to put in quarterbacks of 2 teams that were not terribly successful last year in Hawaii and Nevada.
I agree with you there. It's a lot of movement. At the bottom, that whole bottom 5, they could almost be in any order by the end of the year. There's so many unknowns down there that I think we're not going to know where they're at. Jack Lane is probably the guy on the list. There might not be an FBS QB I know less about than Jack Lane at this point. He's just a guy that I'm not as familiar with. They were one of the teams probably hurt the most by the transfer portal because Dampier was a pretty good QB. He's going to start at Utah this year. So how Lane can go in there might go a long ways towards what we see out of Jason X offense in year one there.
Yeah, and Lane is somebody who I don't think that the arm talent is going to blow anybody away. I don't think that he's going to be a superstar, but he knows the offense. He's coming in from Idaho. Did fairly well operating it last season. I think he can at least do what they're asking him to do. The San Diego State job also is going to be very interesting because they got Jaden Denegal, but they also picked up Bert Emanuel from Central Michigan. And so it's the quarterback so nice that Sean Lewis got him twice. It's kind of the same guy. And I guess it's just going to be a competition of which one can you trust to complete 55% of his passes while running for 700 yards, which is going to be basically the plan with either one.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, it was then O'Neill, who had been there. Wisconsin surprised me as a destination for him because he has almost no chance of being the starter there. So that, I mean, he didn't look great at SDSU either, but him going there was kind of maybe it was just about the NIL money and setting himself up financially for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it could be. I thought that he was going to spend at least one more year there and grow his profile and then jump to a power conference school. I didn't think he was going to be there for 4 years as a starter regardless, but I'm a little surprised that he jumped when he did because it felt like he was just starting to grasp the offense by the end of the season. He was starting to have success and put up the numbers that they wanted him to put up, and the team was not fully improving, but they were at least getting a little bit more consistent at passing the ball. And so I'm surprised that he jumped when he did. I think had he waited another year, he probably could have assumed a power conference starting job in 2026. He would have had that opportunity. I don't think that he will have that opportunity at Wisconsin this year. But I suppose the checks still, they still cash all the same if you want that. And you can, rather than dedicating another year to learning San Diego State system, you can get a head start on learning Wisconsin system and see if you can't contend for that job next year.
Yeah. The other portal move in the conference QB-wise that surprised me was Taj Bullock going to Colorado State. He had been an all-right starter at Akron for Joe Moorhead. The team has struggled, but we saw him do some good things. He's a large body, 6'3", 6'4", 230, and I get transferring to another G5 school, but the Colorado State one surprised me in a spot where you're not going to be the guy.
Yeah, you're not going to be the guy, and it's not really a system that would fit what I would typically associate with Taj Bullock. I would think, I mean, there are 4 or 5 other schools in this conference where if you want to be, contending for a starting spot and you're Taj Bullock, I think would make more sense than the one that he picked. I don't really know why he did that. I maybe they can find a spot role for him, but I don't think it would be any different from, UNLV with Alex Orji, where you can come in and run the read option every now and then, and we're going to take you back out and put our actual quarterback back in. I don't know why he did that. There's a starting spot for him out there somewhere, and he didn't find it.
We talked about New Mexico. That running that fast-paced offense may have been a better move for him, or San Diego State. We talked about the battle they have going on there. I mean, he's not totally different from Bert Emanuel, who will be in the mix for that job. There's definitely some skill set overlap there.
It's that one is going to be, the Colorado State one is going to be interesting because I do wonder if Norvell is, if it's a sign that patience is running a little bit thin with Fowler Nicolosi, not taking final steps towards where he needs to be. It's been several years now, and there are still things in his game that needed to be ironed out several years ago that have still not really come out of his game. He still makes 1 or 2 just disastrously bad throws a game. And I do wonder if Norvell did that not so much to give him competition for the starting job, but more just to have an option if he gets sick of him. And
that's a fair point. Yeah,
it's 3 interceptions through 3 quarters. It's like, you know what? I'm done with this. We're just going to put in Taj Bullock and we're going to see what he can do in this fourth quarter. And if he does well, then maybe it'll be a story for a week in practice and we'll go from there. But it doesn't really make a ton of sense in any other reading of it. So that's what I have to think he was doing.
No, I totally think that's certainly a possible point. So that's good. We'll kind of move on now a little bit to preseason rankings. Just curious. This is done by CFB Edge. This is not one of my original lists, but in looking at this list, I don't hate it, but
that's very high for New Mexico. Sight unseen, it's very high for New Mexico. Yeah. I don't know if New Mexico has ever finished 5th in the Mountain West.
Yeah. And to me, it might be a little low for Air Force, considering how consistent Calhoun has been.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're going to win it, but picking them to be 7 might be underestimating his ability to be consistent.
Yeah, and I mean the thing with Calhoun, like they're gonna have to replace Quentin Hayes, who went into the transfer portal, or I don't even know if he went into the transfer portal. He's just not there anymore at quarterback.
Yes.
And so they're gonna have to find a new quarterback, but most of the rotation is back otherwise, and that's what he does. That's the Troy Calhoun approach, and that's something that really only Air Force, Army, and Navy can still do, because they don't lose upperclassmen. They can't lose upperclassmen to the transfer portal. They can lose the occasional underclassmen. But Air Force's method has been for his entire tenure, will be good for 2 or 3 years, maybe really good in the last of those years. And then we will bottom out for 1 year and we'll play a bunch of sophomores and we'll find new contributors. And then we'll be good for 2 or 3 years again.
Yep.
And they keep on going with that cycle over and over and over again. And they weren't very good last year until November, when those sophomores who they were playing started to grasp what they were doing, and they shut out Oregon State and they beat Nevada, and they I think went 3-1 in their last 4 games. And they started to turn that corner. Betting against Air Force after a losing record season does not usually work out when you're talking about the Calhoun era. They don't stay bad for long, and their bad years are productive. That's been
I'm looking at his bad years. They went 2-10, then they won 10 games the next year. They were 5-7, then they won 11 games the next year. Then 10-10-9. Last year they won 5. The history will tell us we expect an increase on that 5 wins this coming year.
Yeah. And the spots that are weakest on their rotation, the spots where they have the most guys replaced, is like the receiving core. And it's Air Force. They don't really need an experienced receiving core. They're not going to pass the ball.
You need a guy that's going to go 8 yards and get a first down for you, run a good route, catch it.
Yeah, or block. And it's mostly going to be blocking. And it's easier for Air Force to identify blocking receivers because they don't need to look for the same traits at the high school level. They can just look for big physical receivers who are willing to block and who are willing to play within that system.
Yeah, I would be curious, looking at their receivers, how many of them were converted QBs in high school. I feel like they could have a decent amount of them there because it's the type of guy they're getting.
Yeah, they have access to a different talent pool. It's the same one that Army and Navy have had access to for years and years, and Air Force has fewer recruiting restrictions even than those two do, and so they can really lean into that and just they can go and get talent, especially on offense, from option offenses at the high school level that other schools won't touch. Other schools aren't interested in because it's so different from what they're running. Air Force can go and grab those guys, and they can convert quarterbacks, and they can sign up linemen who already know how to do what they're going to ask them to do. And it's just a matter of, timing up your senior class. And that was what they did in 2023. They had a dominant, very, very good senior class. All of those guys graduated, and now they have begun the work of rebuilding their next big senior class. They played a bunch of sophomores. They played a bunch of juniors. I would be surprised if they are 7th, even outside of the top 5. I'd be surprised. Air Force does not stay bad for very long.
No. And one thing that has surprised me a little, when we had a couple years ago, the NCAA changed the chop block rules, which basically was to neuter the triple option. Army and Navy have changed their offenses a lot more than Air Force has. Air Force did keep to those principles more so than a lot of people thought they would. And I'll be curious, when we expect a good season, if that will come into play here.
Yeah. And I think part of it for Air Force too is that the changes at Army and Navy, Cody Worley at Army taking over the offense. They've got Drew Cronick, one of my favorite offensive coordinators at Navy. Those guys, what they did with those offenses was it was innovating for those schools, but it was also kind of catching up to where Air Force had been for years. Air Force has been doing a lot of this stuff already, and so they didn't need to evolve as much because Troy Calhoun, I think, kind of half saw this coming and also half had access to that greater level of talent that they could do a little bit more with their triple option. They could be a little bit more flexible formationally. And so they didn't need to make as many significant changes. That's just the offense that they were running. And
that's a fair point I hadn't thought about. And it also pulls a lot of weight if you consider Army and Navy both do it last year and succeeding in the AAC. Maybe those conference Ds didn't know how or what to game plan for in seeing those teams alter as much as they did.
And it's hard to have all three good at once. It doesn't happen very often. If Army and Navy are going to be good, it means that Air Force is probably not going to be very good in one season. And if it's, Air Force and Navy, then Army is probably going to be down. There are not a ton of years where all three are good. And it's very cyclical with all three of who has the most experienced quarterback and who has the number of seniors. And last year it was Army and Navy, and Air Force was relying on underclassmen, relying on unproven guys. And this year that will probably change. It's a very interesting little part of college football that there are three programs that follow completely different rules from everybody else. But it does make them a little bit easier to predict because you can still kind of how we used to with other teams back before the transfer portal and additional eligibility and all that. You can pretty much just project based on who had the number of seniors last year, who's going to drop because those guys are going to graduate and the team probably won't be as good. Air Force didn't have very many seniors. They're probably going to be better this year.
And I was having this conversation about the service academies with a guy who's an Iowa alumni. And I kind of said, they're in some ways, they're mini Iowas in that they're very dependent on playing complementary football. We're going to play good defense. Our special teams are going to be good. We're going to win the field possession game. And eventually when you screw up, we'll take advantage of it. And then we're going to be able to control the clock enough to grind you out. That is kind of how they try to do things, to their credit.
Yeah, and it was a running joke for several years at Utah State during the Blake Anderson era, just the keeping track of the penalty differential in games against Air Force, because Air Force has like one penalty a game. They'll maybe get called for one holding or one shot block or a face mask or something, and that'll be it. And the Anderson Utah State teams were not quite so disciplined, and so you would have like 10 penalty gaps in those games, and that's what Air Force does. They beat you down, they make you play full drives, full quarters, full games. There's not anything easy that they will give you, and they don't really make a ton of mistakes. And the only time that you see those mistakes slip in is when they have all those young guys. But they're very, very well coached. They're very disciplined, as you would expect. I think they'll be good. I think that I do like in this list the respect for Ken Niumatalolo and San Jose State. I did not think they were going to be as good as they were last season.
No, I didn't either.
They really did a great job of building that offense around Nick Nash and around a very different system from what Ken usually runs, but they did well with it. The defense was pretty solid.
175 targets last year, I think.
Yeah. And then didn't get drafted somehow. That was I don't pay a ton of attention to the draft, but
my first episode when I had two guys on, one of them is an NFL draft guy, one is a college fantasy football. We had a good conversation about San Jose State and their receivers. And it's, it's almost impossible to replace him. It's can the three guys in aggregate replace him, basically, is
Yeah.
what you're looking for.
Yeah, and that's kind of, going to number 3, that's kind of a process that Colorado State went through last year when Torrey Horton went down.
Yeah.
And they won't really get to benefit from that a ton this year because most of those receivers left. Jamari Pearson's person
Yeah.
is at Liberty. Caleb Goody went to Cincinnati. Dane Olson's
did.
gone. But they do have Armani Winfield back. And they obviously get their quarterback back with Fowler Nicolosi. But it's a little bit tricky when you run that offense and you have that superstar receiver. This is something that Utah State has to do with Jalen Royals as well. When you have one guy who you really build your passing game on, the year after that can be very difficult because those guys don't grow on trees. There's not a ton of Torrey Hortons. There's not a ton of Nick Nashes or Jalen Royals out there. Same with Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. And I think that's kind of the overarching storyline for the Mountain West this year is teams having to replace one or two players who they built so much of their success on in previous seasons. UNLV is going to have to replace, Ricky White, Haj Malik Williams. I think Jackson Woodard is gone as well on the defensive side of the ball. Like all
Seahawks.
of these,
it might be Seahawks where he's with now, but I forget.
That sounds right. And so pretty much every team in the Mountain West is in that spot this year where they still have, there's a lot of teams that have good returning production. There's a lot of teams that still have plenty of star power that brought in good transfers, but the star class of players in the conference last year are almost exclusively gone. It's going to be a new batch of standout guys this year, and all of these teams will have to rise to find those players.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. The other one, talking about Jeff Choate before and me being a big fan, I don't know if they'll be as bad again as they were last year. You had mentioned the multiple one-score losses. I see them being higher than 11th at the end of this season. Whether it happens or not, we don't know, but I don't see them being quite as unfortunate snake bitten as they were last year.
Yeah, and it's not like those one-score losses. It's not like that 3-10 season with all of the close calls where they could have won 5 or 6 games if a couple things break differently. It isn't like they had a bunch of young talent or that they had a bunch of guys finding their way. That was a team that was duct taped together. It was just assembled parts, whatever they could find. Brendan Lewis was the quarterback. They made Brendan Lewis a competent quarterback. Like that was a serious achievement. They were able to do that.
We'll see if Memphis can do the same this year. I don't know.
But I think that you give him another year to try and build up that roster. You give him some continuity. I have to think that they will benefit from that because they managed to win 3 games last season, that they were competitive in the games that they were competitive in. I think they took SMU down to the wire, if memory serves.
That was the opener. Yes, they did.
Yeah, they had just a ton of close games, and they had nothing on that roster. They went down to the dump basically, and they found some parts that they thought could maybe work for a football team.
They had Boise in a 1-touchdown game and late in the year. I mean, that was an impressive, showing for them.
Yeah, just the organization.
Oregon State was a tight one.
And the competence down to down that they had was night and day compared to the Ken Wilson era. And they have plenty to replace. They have to replace Lewis. It'll be Chubba Purdy at quarterback. But
is Herschel Turner going to start at running back for him this year? Former Utah State guy.
I think he could. He's a really good player. I was kind of surprised that Utah State didn't fight harder to keep him because I was very impressed with him. He was a guy who, coming out of high school, I don't remember the exact numbers. I think he, if not led the nation in rushing as a high school senior, he was very close, and he ran for, it was like 3,000 yards as a high school senior. Really, really good player. Not the biggest guy in the world, but just finds space. I think that they will know how to use him, and they will find plenty of opportunity for that, even if he's not the full-on starter. But yeah, I believe in that coaching staff. I think that they will find more out of their roster than what the roster will suggest they should be able to do.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Kind of moving on to maybe one of our last topics, but in talking about the playoffs now, it's kind of been different. We got SEC and Big Ten. It's who from that conference is going to make it. Well, with the G5s, you can't necessarily say who's going to make it. There's so many moving parts there. But we'll start off with Mountain West specifically, and then spawn into G5 on the whole. But what do you look for playoff-wise from the G5 this year? Certainly, Boise could challenge again. UNLV could challenge again. What do you look for in the playoff scenarios out of the G5 this year?
Yeah, I think if we're talking to start with the Mountain West, I am of the opinion currently that if it's going to be from the Mountain West, it's going to be Boise. I think UNLV.
That's probably right.
I think UNLV could still be good, but they lose their entire offensive line, and that's a non-starter for me. That's going to be a lot for them to have to do in one offseason. They lose Ricky White, basically their whole receiving core. They do have Jaden Thomas back at halfback, but there's too much new on that team. Where Boise, I mean, they have to replace one of the best players in college football in Ashton Genty, but other than that, I mean, they're in pretty good shape. They brought in a good transfer class. They've got Maddox Madsen back at quarterback. They got Malik Sherrod coming in from Fresno State at halfback, which I think makes sense for them.
They'll be solid on D again. They're not a lot of people score on them.
Yeah. I think their defense was really, it was not the thing that people paid most attention to last season, and for good reason. But the defensive improvement back to being, top 40 level and consistently good was a massive change, because the defense had atrophied a bit there down the stretch under Andy Avalos. They get Jaden Virgin Morgan back at defensive end. They have Braxton Feely back for another year at defensive tackle. Linebacker room is mostly intact outside of Andrew Simpson going to North Carolina. Secondaries, pretty much in the same space. They get all four starters back at corner and safety. They also got, Jaden Mickey coming in from Notre Dame was a part-time starter there in 2023. That's a good player, and they have access to that kind of player in the transfer portal that a lot of other schools in this conference don't have. You don't see a ton of schools here bringing in guys who were starters for P4 schools, guys who were serious contributors for P4 schools. I think if there's going to be a playoff team here, it'll probably be Boise. I don't know if there's another one really in the Mountain West that could challenge for that. And then outside of that, I mean, it's a lot of the usual faces. I'm with being a Marshall now, being a Sun Belt guy.
There's not a Sun Belt team that can challenge for the playoffs, I don't think.
Yeah.
JMU's probably going to be the best one. Sluka, former UNLV guy, going there, reuniting with his former coach. But the conference itself they're going to knock each other out, and a lot of the non-con games might eliminate a lot of those teams. Same thing with the MAC. I don't know that there's a contender. Toledo or Miami, Ohio would be, but I don't know that there's a legit contender under the MAC either for the playoffs.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see a world where the MAC could produce a playoff contender in this current iteration, because all of the games are close, and the parity in the league is such that there's just no real way to break away and have that dominant season. Toledo is maybe the best candidate to do it, but it's really hard to win those games. It's really hard.
And the MAC teams also love being sacrificial lambs and non-con just taking paychecks. Yeah. That's not going to look good to the committee later on.
Yeah. So I think it's more likely probably, Boise, I think out of the American, Memphis always operates in that territory and certainly has
Tulane's going to be good. Tulane would be my pick on the American probably.
I think if we're talking about favorites, it would probably be Tulane.
Yeah. The thing with Tulane is when we get to the G5, it's how many losses can you have to be considered. Tulane plays 3 P5 teams or P4 teams that'll be solid. Northwestern might be down. They still play them. Then they play Duke, who went to a bowl game last year, and then they go to Ole Miss the week after. You're almost certainly not going to win all 3 of those games. You might not even win 2 of them.
Yeah.
You don't get much wiggle room after that, because even at 10-2, you might not be considered as the G5 team. So that it's tough.
Yeah, and alternatively, if they do win, if they beat Duke, they beat Northwestern, and they play Ole Miss competitively, they would be in a position where
Yeah.
that's a really good resume. That's a really, really solid showing
Yeah.
in the non-conference. That's kind of what Boise did last year with the really tight loss to Oregon.
Yeah.
That was just as valuable for them as a lot of their
It
wins.
was.
And so I like Sumrall a lot. I think John Sumrall is one of the best young coaches in college football and just ace recruiter and understands how to build a program that wants to contend at that level. I'm kind of surprised that they managed to keep him. It's a boon for them. But yeah,
we've
I
had
think
multiple SEC after dark talks that the consensus kind of there is he will almost certainly be Kentucky's next head coach.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
he was an alumni and former coach. It
Yeah.
makes all the sense in the world that he will be their next guy.
Yeah.
The
And
question I
think
brought up
that's-
now.
I think that's probably what he's holding out for. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the question I brought up is what would it take for another school to get him before Kentucky does? But we probably would have seen it by now if that were the case with how well
Yeah.
he's done. So it might be that I'm gung ho on going home and being the guy, and I don't need to do anything until then.
Yeah.
Because even if he has a bad year, Kentucky'd still hire him if they get rid of Stoops. So yeah.
Yeah, he has done enough at this point to ingratiate himself, and obviously he has the alumni boost as well. And it's sort of, I mean, it's funny. Like Tulane was not this program for a really long time. Tulane was great in the late '90s, and then pretty desolate for a pretty long time. But Willie Fritz builds it back up, and then he kind of has a similar experience where he could have gone to Georgia Tech. I don't remember which season it was that he could have gone to Georgia Tech, but
the year before it would have been after the 22 season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he could have done that, but they were playing in a bowl game, and he didn't want to leave before that. And I think he also understood that Tulane has the financial investment and has the support needed, that he could just stay there for another year and then probably turn it into another power conference job. And that's exactly what he did. He landed at Houston. And I think that Sumrall made the same calculation of, well, if I'm not 100% sold on any of these jobs, if I want to be at Kentucky or I want to be in the SEC, I might as well just wait, because we're probably going to win 10 or 11 games again next season. I'm going to have everything that I need to build a really good roster in this conference. And I could just wait. I don't need to push to leave right away. I think I'm going to continue to be successful here. And I would tend to agree with that assessment of his. I think Tulane's going to be very good this year, and probably would be the favorite for me right now to be the G5 representative, which is just, like, as an aside, it's really cool. It's very cool that Tulane is in that territory, that we can talk about heading into a season, Tulane being a serious contender for the college football playoff. That's a program that has been through a lot over the years, and it's cool to see the success that they're having.
And out of Conference USA, we expect Liberty and WKU to be good again, but for as weak as CUSA is, you probably have to be 13-0 out of that conference to go to the playoffs. I don't even know if one loss will get you in. Like, that'd be tough.
Yeah, Liberty needs Ethan Vasco to be really good. I think that's going to be kind of the question mark there, because they have the ability to go and get a lot of skill talent, to go and get big bodies on the lines. I think they're going to be fine elsewhere, but they need Vasco to hit, and they need him to be a fit within the system more than Salter was. They kind of bumped up against the limitations of Caden Salter last year, and I think Vasco suits Chadwell better, but we'll see what the top end looks like.
And I like Salter. We have seen him be a good player. He is going to the worst schematic fit in the country and going to Colorado. I think he's a P4 starter at a lot of places, but to me, it made more sense for him to go somewhere that's going to take advantage of his skill set. Now, I fully expect Colorado to be a different system than they were. They're not going to try to do what they did with Shedeur with him, but how they can meld those two together will be fascinating.
Yeah, it is funny the decision that he made to go there, because I would not say that Caden Salter is a great quick decision maker, and that's pretty much all that you do at Colorado. You got to make a lot of quick decisions. Not a strength of his, and the passing game at Liberty really suffered because he did not have that downfield threat that he had with CJ Daniels to bail him out when he inevitably looked off those short routes and waited for something deep to come open. When he waited for something deep to come open last year, there was nobody there, and he got sacked or threw the ball away.
We'll change gears a little bit. When we're on our G5 kick, we're hearing a lot about conference realignment and Texas State likely leaving the Sun Belt for the new look Pac-12. Hearing that La Tech is likely a team that the conference, is looking at. Today we heard ECU may, have been reached out to, and then a lot of the people I'm hearing want Western Kentucky, but I don't know how realistic that is. Obviously, out west, you've seen as much conference realignment as anybody. Where do you want to start with that? What are your thoughts right now about either of those conferences, Sun Belt replacements or Pac-12?
Yeah, for the Pac-12, it's been long enough out here that I think that the prevailing thought is just like, let's get this over with. Let's get to first things first. Like I see people talking about potential conference championship game sites and talking about TV deals and all that, and it's like, well, let's get 8 teams to make it an actual conference first, and then we can talk about all of that other stuff. But you're going to need the 8 teams, and they don't have them yet. They have 7 plus Gonzaga for basketball. And so I think Texas State makes sense. I think a lot of the candidates that have been thrown out would make sense.
To me, if you're getting Texas State, I also thought maybe going after UTSA would have made sense if you could pull an AAC team. They're in a massive market in San Antonio, and you pair them with an in-state team would have made sense to me.
Yeah, and I think that it is a situation where Texas State, could benefit from the change and could see a growth in its program from the change, because it will be regionally unique within the conference, and it will have a niche that it can fill. Whereas in the Sun Belt, it's never really made sense as the lone, as the Texas team that's just kind of out there trying to find its way in the wilderness. I think that they've started to find their way and could hit their stride as they move into the Pac-12. I am interested to see, not that this is a basketball show, but culturally how Texas State will fit in the Pac-12, because it's a basketball conference. The way that it's constructed right now is as a basketball conference. Utah State's a basketball school. San Diego State's a basketball school. Boise State does a little bit of both. Fresno State, more football side. Colorado State traditionally kind of does both, but I would say more basketball than football. Gonzaga obviously is what it is. And then you have the Pac-2, which are more football oriented, but Texas State, not a basketball program that I would associate with high quality play necessarily. And so I'm curious to see how they fit into that, but I do think that they can expand to fill their new container a little bit. And I think that they have the fan base that is needed to undertake that sort of growth as a program. I'm just ready for it to be done. I'm ready to know who's in the league and where it's going to be aired and what kind of money that they're bringing in. And I think Texas State would make sense. I think that either of the, any of the AAC schools that were thrown around would have made sense. I think the Mountain West schools that got left behind would have made sense. Just whoever it is that'll get them to 8 teams, I'm content with at this point.
What's going to happen with Sac State? We're hearing their, petition to come as an independent has been denied. Is the next step CUSA? Is it the Mountain West? Is it the Pac-12? I feel like there's a lot of ways they could go, and we don't have big inclination, especially out east. We're not hearing much about it. So I was wondering if you had any more knowledge there.
I'm guessing, and I'm skeptical of the situation at Sacramento State, because it seems it's whenever this amount of money flows into a program all at once, it's hard not to be a little suspicious of what's going on there.
We were with Liberty when it happened a few years ago.
Yeah. It's like, who's paying for all of this? who's paying for Mike Bibby to be the basketball coach? Who's bringing in Brennan Marion? Who's bringing in all of these high profile recruits? Where's this coming from? And this massive push, like, is this actually supported by anything, or is it just a massive benefactor who is trying to push them into the FBS, which seems far more likely for programs that haven't really actually been all that good historically or all that supported historically. I would guess that if they're going to find a home at the FBS level, it would probably have to be the Mountain West or the CUSA. I don't think that the Pac-12 would touch them right now, because I think
Okay.
a lot of those. I don't imagine that I'm the only one who holds those suspicions of Sacramento State as sort of a just just showing up with a bunch of money and no history and no real fan base. I don't know that the Pac-12 schools, the new Pac-12 schools, necessarily want to associate themselves with that right now. Maybe 15, 20 years down the line, when Sacramento State has more of an established history, that could become.
Stability. Yeah.
Yeah, but right now, I think that the new Pac-12 wants to look respectable and wants to look like a serious football conference, like a serious basketball conference, like a collection of schools that people consider not power conference, but the best of the G5. And I don't know that they would be interested in bringing Sacramento State in at that point, because I just don't know what value you'd get other than the infusion of money that they currently have that they might not always have. And so I think if they come up, it'll be one of the smaller conferences.
Yeah, I think your point about those two makes a lot of sense. Like regionally and identity wise, the Mountain West would make the most sense if they would have them. With CUSA, you don't really have those similarities or fit, but CUSA has shown us they don't care about that. They really just need warm bodies to stay alive at this point, and will take anybody that's jumping up. And we can't blame them. It's about self-preservation. They need these teams to do what they're doing, so they would take them if they had to.
Yeah, and I think the CUSA, interestingly, has kind of shifted away from 10 years ago. If Sacramento State was trying to come up, CUSA would have taken them in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because it's an urban area with a decent number of people there, and you could maybe sell that to TV people. That used to be the approach for the CUSA, but you look at their recent additions, like Delaware's a good football program, Kennesaw State's a good football program, Jacksonville
Missouri State's been okay at football.
Yeah. Missouri State is kind of the odd duck there, but still has been successful, especially recently. Liberty's very well supported and has been successful. Like they've really kind of shifted away from the just grab Charlotte approach. Yeah. They just we want as many teams and cities that we could possibly get. They haven't done as much of that. They've taken more of the Sun Belt approach in recent years of grabbing successful programs and then assuming that will then build from there, and that the brand can build from there. But you can't build a fan base, you can't build support without success. Which is what they were trying to do before. They were trying to just grab places where people are and then assume that the football program would follow, rather than doing it the other way around. And so I would guess if there's going to be an FBS conference that will bite with Sacramento State, it would be the Mountain West. I think that's the identity that they are not necessarily trying to build, but they kind of have to build right now, of, like you said, just survival mode, just trying to grab teams that would make sense regionally. You got UTEP coming in. You have, Hawaii is going to become a full member. They're just trying to survive. They've got Grand Canyon. They need teams. They need, revenue. They need things that they can put on TV. And I think that Sacramento State could buy its way into that. I don't think it could go a ton higher than that right now.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think Grand Canyon would ever explore adding football?
Probably. I think that they could. I could see. I mean, Grand Canyon's whole thing is expanding. Grand Canyon's whole
everything about them is getting bigger.
Yeah, we want as much as we possibly can of whatever it is that you're selling. We just they want more money in basketball, more money in any other number of sports, and football, I think, would be a natural transition point for them at some point, and is almost certainly something that they have considered, and they are continuing to consider, because why not? If you have the conference affiliation, if you have the money to do it, which they certainly do, you might as well. That's more more that you can sell, and I think that's the whole MO of Grand Canyon.
Yeah, and you made a very good point about their mantra at this point. If 2 is good, 3 is better. They're all about just more, and so I think that's a fair point. And kind of one thing we've ended on, in each of these episodes is, do you have is there a specific, hot take you have going into this college football season, or, point you're willing to stand on that maybe, unheard of or not as popular in some quarters? Any parting shot you want to give, or, take?
Um, hmm. I've got a whole filing cabinet in my brain of potential
Yeah.
takes. I'll go with a little bit of a less timely one, a little bit of a less controversial one, but one that may still not have a ton of purchase with, you said a lot of SEC listeners. So I'll use this as an opportunity to promote something that you might not be so familiar with. I think that Wyoming has one of the 5 best stadiums in college football. I think it is one of the absolute best places to watch a college football game. It's not huge. It's kind of a wind tunnel, but it feels like a high school stadium that just expanded and expanded and expanded, but maintained the identity that you get from high school football onto a larger stage. It is a beautiful, beautiful place to watch a football game. It feels like everything that you want a night game or a football game of any sort to feel like. If anybody ever has the chance to see a game in Laramie, 100% recommend. It's got to be a stadium bucket list item, because it's perfect. I went in 2022, I think. I haven't been back since, but I still remember that game more vividly than any other that I have covered, standing on the sidelines.
Awesome.
It's amazing. It's an amazing place to watch a football game.
That's good to know. Yeah, I appreciate that. I definitely a place I would like to see a game. My hot take related to this episode is Utah State tangent, and it is related to your former head coach, Blake Anderson. He is now the offensive coordinator at Southern Miss with former Marshall head coach Charles Huff. I think they will be, in terms of wins over last year, they will be the most improved team in America. They were 1-11 last year. I think they have, obviously that's a lot of room to increase too, but no one will increase their win total more this year than Southern Miss in America. That's where I'm at.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's the only similarities that this Southern Miss team has with last year's is the jersey. Everything else is pretty much just
took half of Marshall's good players too with them. So, and those guys won a conference last year.
Yeah. You've got 85 new players essentially.
Yeah. But Patrick, you can find him on the Egg Ship covering Utah State. Would like to thank you for being here. Felt it was a great episode. I'm Mike Huseman, and this is our 3rd episode of Off Season After Dark. Thank you all for being here.